Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'm going to discuss what the spring budget announcement made by the Chancellor Rishi Sunak earlier this week really means for people in this country, to just make it really stark without going through all the tedious details. And little hint, given that even the Tory media couldn't praise it, you can be sure that it's going to be a bad time for all. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, a bit of a series this. There's several different angles I'm taking with the budget. Yesterday I discussed Rishi Sunak's political ambitions. Today I'm going to be talking about the real difference between what this budget means for people and what previous political choices have meant for people. And then I think I'm also going to be discussing in a couple of days, potentially, why it is that the government would produce a statement like this when it has been so universally panned. But let's get straight down to brass tacks here. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation produced a graphic which breaks down the income changes for different deciles according to household income. The y-axis represents the percentage change based on the previous year. The bars are broken down into the various contributing factors, but the red curve shows the net impact. And you can see that based on the statement by Sunak, almost everyone will be worse off than last year. This isn't like just hitting the poor and helping the rich. This is hurting everyone. This seventh decile does get a slightly above zero boost, but nothing for anyone else. But look who is hardest hit. The lowest income decile are being crushed by an income that is not keeping up with inflation is the major contributing factor there. And it's all right saying that the national insurance rise won't hit them as hard, taking away over £1,000 a year from the lowest income households, which is what happened when they took away the universal credit uplift. And that includes people who work full time, but on minimum wage. The government have the nerve to call a living wage, by the way, minimum wage. In fact, although you can see that the top 10% of households by income have on balance a reduction in income, it's only comparable with the fourth decile. So the bottom 30% of households by income have the greatest reductions to their real terms incomes of all. This chart lays bare that those who can least afford it are getting hit the hardest. But isn't that just the way things work out? Isn't that just unfortunate? No. I've said no end of times that this is a political choice. So, let's prove it, shall we? Let us see a similar exercise when Labour are in power. Now, this covers the full period of the last Labour government. This was actually done in 2010, and it covers the whole period from 1997 to 2010 and includes the global banking crisis. But what's important is not the percentage themselves. Obviously, we cannot compare the percentages here, which covers 13 years of a Labour government with 1 year of a Conservative government. It's the distribution that matters. The poorest decile not just gained, but gained the most. And that trend continued. It was consistent because it was carefully thought through. There was economic strategy behind it. That trend continued through the deciles, with the seventh decile onwards getting a net income reduction. So the top 30% of households by income were getting a bit of a reduction compared to the Tory years. In other words, after a long period of Conservative rule under mostly Thatcher and then Major, Labour redressed the balance to make those who could afford it pay more and those who could least afford it get more. So please do not ever, and I mean ever, let people tell you it doesn't make any difference whether the Tories or Labour are in power. This was mostly under Tony Blair. Absolutely a centrist Labour leader. As far to the right as it is possible to be and still be in Labour. Were he any further to the right, it wouldn't have made sense for him to be in Labour. He'd have had an easier time in politics in the Conservative Party. And yet, given that he was as far to the right as it's possible for a Labour leader to be, this was the result. It's no coincidence that a Labour government not only boosts the income of the lowest earners, but makes sure those on the very lowest incomes get the biggest boost. It's also no coincidence that this pattern is reversed when the Conservatives get to work. Actually, I say reverse. That is the general pattern across the Conservative power. But obviously, with this latest budget from Sunak, he's actually hitting everyone hard. And the thing about the graphic for Sunak's handiwork is that it would be an interesting view if that last decile was broken further down. Because you may think, well, at least the wealthiest are losing out as well, like with the national insurance hike and all that. Well, the top 10% are nowhere near in the same league as, say, the top 1%. And even in the top 1%, there's a huge... Because once you get into that 10th decile, it explodes, the income explodes. So there's a big difference between, like, you know, those and the 90th percentile and the 91st and then the 92nd. It just accelerates, exponential almost, particularly when you get into that top 1%. You know, his budget is for the super wealthy. It doesn't really help even wealthy voters. It's fiscal policy for the billionaires, many of whom will not even vote in the UK, and if they did, could not possibly be a large enough group to return a single Tory MP during a general election. In order to win and retain power, and I'm going to expand more on this on a video in a couple of days, the Conservatives need to convince millions of people to vote for a party that will make them poorer. This means that dishonesty has to be at the heart of all they do. The first stage of this deception is always to try and claim that the economy is doing well. If you personally are not, it's because you are in the minority. You're probably just lazy or maybe even unlucky if you want to tell yourself that. But most people are doing fine because we're brilliant with the economy. And you just have to plug away at life, you know, and it'll all work out for you. Eventually, because we're doing a marvellous job with the economy. Just keep going and you'll eventually get the rewards. Obviously, this is not true. The second stage is when they have to acknowledge that a lot of people are facing tough times, like now. No point trying to deny the financial problems facing most people because they're so widespread. We have the largest fall in living standards in a single year since records in the UK began in the 1950s. In the face of this, the Conservatives will often try and blame something else. It's not the result of their political choices, but it's external factors, you know. But the truth is there are always external factors. Sure, a deadly pandemic and war in Europe are exceptional factors, but there's always something. There's always volatility in the market somewhere, and crises will always occur. Sometimes these crises will cause a hit to the economy, as the banking crisis did in 2008 and coronavirus did in 2020. These are certainly outside of the government's control. However, what is very much in the government's control is how you distribute the recovery efforts. These charts show really clearly that Labour make the political choice to shift the burden towards those who will not see any drop to their living standards. They may gripe about the fact that they're paying a little bit more, but do you know what? They're still living their lives, and it's a nice, comfortable life at that. The Conservatives clearly make the political choice to squeeze the poorest. Those who have to choose between heating and eating. Those who actually at the moment can't even make that choice. Now we're getting stories, as I say, of people having to not get potatoes from the food bank because they can't afford to cook them. Of people having to keep a woolly hat under their pillow for when it's too cold at night. For people who can't put the lights on. They can't afford it. You know, and this is all there is to it. And it's easy to give specific examples of how we could deal with the cost of living crisis. It's all right to say, Phil, it's all right saying this, but, you know, how would you deal with it? As if it's difficult. There are some things that are complicated. There are some things. Like some people talk about a wealth tax. Actually, that is quite complicated. Doesn't mean you shouldn't apply it. It's not as simple as some make out. But there are some very simple things. First of all, energy prices are really high, but energy companies are making massive profits. Tax them. Put a tax on the profits and use the money raised to reduce energy bills. This is what happened in France. It's easy. It's a political choice. The Tories chose to not tax the energy profits and instead put the burden of higher costs on the people. That was their political choice. Second, fuel prices. Rishi Sunak took himself off to Sainsbury's after his statement for a photo opportunity. He pretended to fill up his car, as if anyone would think that someone that wealthy had a Kia. It turned out, surprise, surprise, to be a Sainsbury's employee's car, which he offered to fill up for the photo op. But then he made a mess of the purchase. Couldn't actually work out how to use his card to pay for it. I said at the time, I cannot understand how a banker with so much money doesn't actually know how transactions work. I mean, genuinely amazed he didn't know how to pay for things. But obviously he's not used to paying for things. So he would not understand the problems with rising fuel prices. He has announced a 5p reduction in fuel duty. Does that compensate for the 40 pence increase in the cost of fuel over the last year? But you know, what to do? Again, fuel companies are making record profits. Bit of a theme here with massive corporations making record profits. Tax them. Nobody's talking about taking all their profits. We're not saying, oh, give us all those profits. No, not even close to half of them. We don't need that. You know, just an extra 10% on the super profits of the most lucrative. I'm not even saying just raise corporation tax. Don't even have to do that. Just 10% on the super profits of the most lucrative corporations. That would generate a lot of revenue. Doesn't have to be an increase in corporation tax that hits lots of other businesses that may be struggling, like I say. And it doesn't even have to be there for all eternity. Just a windfall tax on super profits at times when the economy's struggling. And a modest one at that. You know, they still have plenty of dividends there. You know, that would have paid for the fuel duty to be reduced to completely wipe out those price increases. I discussed in a separate video recently how the government could have paid for the rising cost of living completely just with the £43 billion they wrote off. They just gave away and got nothing for it, with a significant proportion of it being fraud that they just refused to chase up. So they could have made the political choice to spare us from the rising cost of living, and they wouldn't have even had to tax the corporations more if they didn't want to. Of course, you know, they should have done both. That way they can properly finance our public services. You know, they'll make out that dealing with coronavirus has cost us a fortune and now it has to be paid back. No, it's not true. The only thing that has cost us is the fraud and their hard Brexit that they refuse to deal with. But even where there has been emergency spending, like furlough, for example, £70 billion furlough. There's still a political choice as to who pays for it. It's the poorest workers with a national insurance rise. That was their choice. Could have been the wealthiest with a wealth tax, couldn't it? Or something similar, like I say, tax on super profits of corporations. That would have funded it and all. And as furlough didn't actually cost that much, really, all things considered, wouldn't have needed much of an additional tax, a few percent. It has been suggested, like I say, a wealth tax on top, on the 1% of earners, just the 1%, in the UK would raise at least 70 billion a year. Could easily be double that, but at least, because it is difficult with wealth tax, because it's all right saying, oh, well, if you put a wealth tax on these, you'd raise this much money. It's like, yeah, but you know what will happen? They'll just hide their wealth, won't they? But at least 70 billion a year, guaranteed. That was furlough. That covered the furlough. And that's just the 1%. That's not, you know, ordinary people, you or I, or even high earners. That's the top 1%. That, just to be clear, you know, I'm not talking about people who are comfortable or have good jobs and all the rest of it. The top 1%. People who make an absolute fortune each year and wouldn't notice just a few percent extra tax. You telling me that we cannot apply a small extra tax on them if it means we can pay for our pandemic spending and avoid the need for the financial squeeze on the poorest households? Do me a favour. This budget statement by Rishi Sunak was a series of political choices. Different political choices would have been easily applied and would mean that despite the rising costs caused by those, you know, devilish external factors, ordinary people wouldn't actually be plunged into poverty to deal with it. The government could have shielded 99% of the population from any increase in the cost of essentials. They chose not to. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.